Rachel Parker spent 18 months planning the most important day of her life with the one person she trusted more than anyone else in the world, her best friend, Olivia Grant. They picked the flowers together, laughed over cake tastings, and spent late evenings talking about what the future would look like after Rachel married the man she believed was the love of her life, Ethan Cole. For Rachel, it felt like the beginning of everything she had always dreamed about. But 2 weeks before the ceremony, a single email arrived that would freeze her in place. At first, she thought it was a mistake, maybe a spam message or a glitch in the system. The subject line read, "Wedding Invitation." Rachel clicked it casually, expecting to see another bridal promotion or vendor reminder. Instead, she saw something that made her hands tremble. The bride listed on the invitation was Olivia Grant, and the groom was Ethan Cole. For several seconds, Rachel simply stared at the screen, convinced she was misunderstanding something obvious. Her mind searched for an explanation that would make sense of what she was looking at. Maybe someone else shared the same names. Maybe it was a cruel joke. But when she scrolled further down the invitation, the photographs confirmed everything. There was Ethan, smiling in the same navy suit he had worn when he proposed to her months earlier. Standing beside him, holding his arm, was Olivia, the same Olivia who had spent weekends helping Rachel plan her own wedding to that very man. The same Olivia who had reassured her whenever wedding stress made Rachel anxious. In that moment, Rachel realized the celebration she had been preparing for nearly 2 years was still going to happen. The only difference was that she would not be the bride. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers across the world. Whether you're in Atlanta, Chicago, Toronto, Los Angeles, London, or anywhere else. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Because what happened between Rachel Parker, Olivia Grant, and Ethan Cole is more than a shocking betrayal. It is a story about trust, jealousy, and the quiet ways friendships can change without anyone realizing it. When Rachel first told people what had happened, many asked the same question. How could a best friend do something like this? But the deeper we look into the timeline of their lives, the more complicated the answer becomes. To understand how this story unfolded, we have to go back nearly 15 years before that email appeared in Rachel's inbox. Rachel Parker and Olivia Grant first met during their sophomore year at a small university in North Carolina. Rachel had transferred from another college after deciding she wanted a quieter environment and a fresh start. Olivia was outgoing, confident, and seemed to know everyone on campus. Their friendship began the way many college friendships do, with shared classes, late-night study sessions, and long conversations about what life would look like after graduation. Rachel admired Olivia's confidence, while Olivia often said she appreciated Rachel's calm and thoughtful personality. And they quickly became inseparable, the kind of friends who spent holidays together when they could not travel home. After graduation, their lives followed similar paths. Rachel found a stable job in marketing at a healthcare company in Charlotte. Olivia moved into event planning, a career that fit her energetic personality perfectly. Despite the demands of their adult lives, their friendship remained strong. They celebrated birthdays together, supported each other through breakups, and spoke on the phone several times a week. Friends described them as the type of duo that seemed permanently connected. If Rachel hosted a dinner party, Olivia was always there. If Olivia needed advice about work or relationships, Rachel was usually the first person she called. For more than a decade, nothing about their friendship suggested the kind of ending that would eventually unfold. Ethan Cole entered Rachel's life on an autumn evening when she attended a co-worker's small gathering at a downtown restaurant. Ethan was quiet but charming, the kind of person who listened carefully before speaking. He worked in real estate and had recently moved to Charlotte after accepting a new position. Rachel remembered that their first conversation lasted nearly an hour, covering everything from favorite travel destinations to childhood memories. When she told Olivia about him the following day, Olivia seemed genuinely excited for her. In fact, Olivia insisted on meeting Ethan almost immediately. Rachel laughed at the enthusiasm, but she agreed. Within a few weeks, the three of them were spending time together regularly, sharing dinners, movie nights, and weekend outings around the city. As Rachel's relationship with Ethan grew stronger, Olivia remained deeply involved in her life. She helped Rachel choose an anniversary gift for Ethan during their first year together and offered advice whenever Rachel worried about whether the relationship was moving too quickly. Friends later said Olivia often acted like a supportive older sister rather than just a friend. When Ethan eventually proposed during a quiet vacation in the mountains, Rachel called Olivia before she even told some members of her family. Olivia screamed with excitement on the phone, on asking to see the ring and immediately offering to help plan the wedding. Rachel happily accepted the offer. After all, Olivia worked in event planning and had experience organizing large celebrations. Over the next several months, wedding planning became a major part of Rachel's life. Olivia threw herself into the process with remarkable energy. She arranged meetings with photographers, recommended venues, and even helped Rachel narrow down the guest list. Rachel trusted Olivia completely. If Olivia suggested a particular florist or caterer, Rachel rarely questioned the recommendation. Ethan also seemed comfortable with Olivia's involvement. The three of them often joked that the wedding might never happen without Olivia's organizational skills. To Rachel, it felt like the most natural arrangement in the world. Her best friend and her future husband working together to help create the happiest day of her life. But as the months passed, a few small moments began to feel slightly unusual. Rachel noticed that Ethan and Olivia sometimes exchanged quick glances during conversations, as if they shared a private understanding. Occasionally, Olivia would mention having spoken to Ethan about certain wedding details before Rachel had discussed them with him herself. Rachel dismissed these things as harmless coordination between the maid of honor and the groom. After all, planning a wedding required constant communication. Still, in quiet moments, Rachel sometimes wondered whether she was imagining subtle changes in the way Ethan behaved around Olivia. Those thoughts never lasted long. Trust, once established for many years, can be difficult to question. By the time Rachel and Ethan set their final wedding date, nearly 18 months had passed since the engagement. Invitations were ready to be mailed, the venue was booked, and Rachel's dress hung carefully in a garment bag in her bedroom closet. Olivia continued to help manage the countless details that come with planning a ceremony. She attended dress fittings, coordinated with vendors, and reassured Rachel whenever the stress of the process became overwhelming. To anyone observing from the outside, the situation looked ideal. A bride supported by her closest friend and preparing to marry a man who appeared deeply committed to her happiness. Then just 2 weeks before the ceremony, Rachel opened that email and saw the invitation announcing a different wedding. The bride listed was Olivia Grant. The groom was Ethan Cole, and the date printed on the invitation was only 3 weeks away. In that moment, Rachel realized something that would take months to fully understand. The story she believed she was living had been quietly rewritten without her knowledge. The friendship she had trusted for more than 15 years was no longer what it appeared to be. And the wedding she had spent nearly 2 years planning was still going to take place, just not with her standing at the altar. Rachel sat motionless at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop illuminating a face that had slowly lost all color. For a long time she did not move, not because she didn't want to, but because her mind was trying desperately to rearrange reality into something that made sense. People often imagine betrayal as a sudden explosion, a dramatic confrontation where truth arrives loudly and unmistakably. But in Rachel's case, the realization came quietly. It came through an email invitation and a photograph of two people she trusted most in the world, standing together as if nothing had ever been wrong. Rachel closed the laptop, opened it again, and stared once more at the names printed clearly on the screen. Olivia Grant and Ethan Cole, her best friend and her fiancé. The words felt unreal, like characters in a story she was reading, rather than the center of her own life. At first, Rachel did what many people would do in that moment. She searched for a logical explanation that would soften the meaning of what she had just seen. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Olivia was helping plan someone else's wedding and used Ethan's name by mistake in a mock invitation template. Now, Rachel even considered the possibility that someone had hacked Olivia's email account and sent the invitation as a prank. But each new explanation collapsed under the weight of the evidence in front of her. The photos attached to the invitation showed Ethan and Olivia standing close together in a series of professional engagement pictures. They were holding hands. In one photo, Ethan kissed Olivia gently on the forehead while she laughed. Rachel recognized the park where the photos had been taken. It was the same park where Ethan had proposed to her 8 months earlier. Rachel picked up her phone and stared at Ethan's contact name for several seconds before calling. The phone rang 5 times before going to voicemail. She tried again. The second call rang longer but still ended without an answer. Rachel felt her heartbeat begin to quicken as the silence stretched across the room. Then she called Olivia. The call went straight to voicemail. Rachel left no message. Instead, she placed the phone back on the table and sat quietly, staring at nothing in particular as her thoughts raced in every direction. A strange clarity began forming in her mind. If this invitation was real, then whatever had happened between Olivia and Ethan had not happened suddenly. It had required planning, secrecy, and time, which meant the signs Rachel had ignored for months were no longer harmless coincidences. Over the next several hours, Rachel slowly began reviewing the previous year of her life in a way she never had before. Memories that once seemed ordinary now appeared different when viewed through the possibility of deception. She remembered evenings when Ethan had said he needed to work late, but returned home smelling faintly of the same floral perfume Olivia often wore. She remembered Olivia mentioning conversations she had supposedly had with Ethan about wedding details that Rachel herself had never discussed with him. At the time, Rachel believed it was simply Olivia being helpful and organized. Now those moments felt like pieces of a puzzle she had unknowingly been living inside. The more Rachel thought about it, the more she realized something deeply unsettling. If Olivia and Ethan had been involved for months, and then Olivia had been helping Rachel plan a wedding she already knew would never happen. Late that evening, Rachel opened her laptop again and searched Olivia's social media accounts. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Olivia's public pages still displayed cheerful posts about work events and travel photos from earlier in the year. But when Rachel looked more carefully, she noticed something new. Olivia had created a second account on another platform several months earlier, one Rachel had never been aware of. The account was private, but the small preview image revealed a photograph Rachel recognized instantly. It showed Ethan and Olivia standing together at a restaurant Rachel had visited with Ethan the previous winter. The caption under the photo read simply, "Some stories begin long before anyone realizes." Rachel felt a chill run through her as she stared at the image. The date on the post suggested it had been uploaded nearly 5 months earlier. Rachel realized then that the story unfolding in front of her had likely started much earlier than she ever imagined. And that realization forced her to ask a question she had avoided until that moment. When exactly had Ethan and Olivia crossed the line from friendship into something else? The timeline mattered because it determined how long the deception had been happening directly in front of her. If their relationship had begun recently, perhaps it was a reckless decision fueled by wedding stress or emotional confusion. But if it had started months earlier, then Olivia had spent nearly a year standing beside Rachel, offering support and encouragement, while secretly building a relationship with the very man Rachel planned to marry. The thought was almost impossible for Rachel to accept. The following morning, Rachel received a message from Ethan. It arrived as a short text that appeared on her phone screen while she was pouring coffee in the kitchen. The message read, "We need to talk. I know you probably saw something online. I'll explain everything." Rachel stared at the message for a long time before responding. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed the words, "When did this start?" Ethan's reply came several minutes later. "It's complicated." Rachel read the words twice and felt a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over her. In moments like these, people sometimes hope the truth will arrive gently, but the reality is that the truth often reveals itself slowly, piece by piece, until the entire picture becomes unavoidable. 2 hours later, Ethan arrived at Rachel's apartment. When Rachel opened the door, she noticed immediately that he looked nervous, though he tried to hide it with a calm expression. For a moment, neither of them spoke. When Ethan stepped inside and sat on the couch while Rachel remained standing across the room. The silence stretched for several seconds before Ethan finally began to speak. He said that things had become confusing over the past few months, that he and Olivia had developed feelings unexpectedly, and that neither of them initially intended for the situation to go as far as it had. Rachel listened quietly, her face almost expressionless. When Ethan finished speaking, she asked the question that had been forming in her mind since the night before. "How long?" Ethan hesitated before answering. Then he said something that Rachel would remember for years afterward. He said the relationship with Olivia had begun nearly 10 months earlier. 10 months. That meant it had started shortly after Rachel and Ethan finalized the venue for their wedding. It meant Olivia had attended dress fittings, bridal showers, or no planning meetings while secretly involved with the groom. It meant the entire process Rachel believed she was sharing with her closest friend had been happening alongside a completely different relationship she knew nothing about. Rachel felt the weight of those 10 months settle heavily in her chest as she realized the scale of the deception. When Ethan left the apartment later that day, Rachel sat quietly by the window for a long time watching cars move along the street below. The world outside continued as if nothing unusual had happened. People walked their dogs, neighbors carried groceries into their homes, and somewhere in the distance a lawnmower hummed steadily across a patch of grass. Rachel realized something strange about betrayal. It rarely announces itself to the outside world with the same intensity it brings into a person's life. For everyone else, the day looked ordinary. For Rachel, it marked the moment when 15 years of friendship and 2 years of love had suddenly collapsed into a truth she was still struggling to comprehend. But the deeper Rachel looked into the story behind Ethan and Olivia's relationship, the more she began to understand that this betrayal was not simply about two people falling in love unexpectedly. There were details in the timeline that suggested something far more complicated. Messages exchanged months earlier. Secret meetings that happened while Rachel believed wedding planning was underway. And small moments of behavior that hinted Olivia might have been watching Rachel's life more closely than anyone realized. As Rachel began piecing together those details, a disturbing possibility started to take shape. What if Olivia had not simply fallen for Ethan by accident? What if the story between them had begun long before Rachel ever suspected anything at all? And as we continue this story, one question remains at the center of everything. Was Olivia Grant just a friend who crossed a line she should never have crossed? Or had she been quietly competing with Rachel Parker for years without anyone noticing? Because the deeper Rachel looked into her own past, the more she realized some betrayals do not begin with a single decision. Sometimes they begin with jealousy that grows slowly over time, hidden inside friendships that appear perfectly normal from the outside. In the days that followed Ethan's confession, Rachel found herself moving through life in a strange emotional fog. She went to work, answered emails, and spoke politely to coworkers who had no idea that the foundation of her personal life had collapsed overnight. But each evening when she returned home, the silence of her apartment reminded her of the truth she was still trying to accept. The wedding dress still hung in her closet. The invitations she had prepared were stacked neatly on her desk. And somewhere in the city, the two people she trusted most had already begun building a future that no longer included her. What hurt Rachel most was not only the relationship between Ethan and Olivia, but the realization that Olivia had been standing beside her during every step of the wedding preparations while hiding a completely different reality. As Rachel slowly began telling close family members what had happened, the reactions were almost identical. Shock came first, followed quickly by anger on Rachel's behalf. Many of them struggled to understand how Olivia could have remained so involved in the wedding plans if she had already developed a relationship with Ethan. One of Rachel's cousins asked a question that lingered in Rachel's mind long after the conversation ended. She asked, "Did Olivia ever seem jealous of you?" At first, Rachel dismissed the idea immediately. For 15 years, she had believed Olivia genuinely celebrated her successes. But later that evening, as Rachel sat alone with her thoughts, she began remembering small moments from the past that suddenly seemed more complicated than they once appeared. There had been times during college when Olivia joked about Rachel always attracting attention without trying. Friends often described Rachel as naturally warm and approachable, while Olivia's confidence sometimes came across as intense or competitive. Rachel had always believed those differences balanced their friendship rather than creating tension. But now she wondered whether certain comments Olivia made over the years might have contained more truth than Rachel realized. Olivia once laughed during a group dinner and said, "Rachel somehow always ends up with the best things in life." At the time, everyone laughed, including Rachel. Yet looking back, Rachel could not remember whether Olivia had been joking as lightly as it seemed. Determined to understand exactly what had happened, Rachel began reviewing months of text messages between herself and Olivia. Most of the conversations looked perfectly normal. Olivia asked about wedding colors, suggested ideas for decorations, and frequently reassured Rachel whenever stress about the ceremony appeared in their conversations. But as Rachel read carefully through the messages, She noticed subtle shifts in Olivia's tone that she had overlooked before. In several messages, Olivia encouraged Rachel to trust Ethan whenever Rachel mentioned concerns about his late work hours or sudden travel plans. Olivia often reminded her that wedding planning could make couples feel overwhelmed and that patience was important during stressful periods. Rachel realized those reassurances had kept her from questioning Ethan's behavior at the exact time his relationship with Olivia was quietly developing. Another discovery unsettled Rachel even more. Several months earlier, Olivia had asked Rachel for help accessing an old email account while they were sitting together at Rachel's apartment. Rachel remembered casually typing her password into Olivia's laptop so they could retrieve a document Rachel had saved for a work project. At the time, it felt like a harmless favor between close friends. But as Rachel replayed that moment in her memory, she suddenly wondered whether Olivia might have remembered the password Rachel typed that evening. If Olivia had access to Rachel's email or messages, it would explain how she seemed to know details about Rachel's plans before Rachel even shared them directly. Rachel's suspicions grew stronger when she spoke with a mutual friend named Melissa, who had attended several wedding planning events. Melissa mentioned something Rachel had not known before. A few months earlier, she had seen Olivia and Ethan having lunch together at a restaurant near Olivia's office. Melissa assumed they were discussing wedding arrangements and did not think to mention it to Rachel at the time. But when Rachel told Melissa what had happened, the memory suddenly seemed more significant. Melissa said the two of them looked comfortable together, almost like a couple rather than two people discussing logistics for someone else's wedding. Each new detail Rachel uncovered made the story clearer and more painful at the same time. Olivia and Ethan had not simply made a sudden emotional mistake. They had been meeting privately, sharing conversations, and building a relationship while Rachel continued believing both of them were supporting her. Rachel began to understand that the betrayal was not only about romance, it involved trust, access, and knowledge of Rachel's personal life that Olivia had gathered over many years. The deeper Rachel examined those details, the more she wondered whether Olivia's connection with Ethan had been influenced by something that existed long before Rachel introduced them. Meanwhile, in the news about Ethan and Olivia's upcoming wedding began spreading through their shared circle of friends. Some people expressed disbelief, while others quietly admitted they had sensed unusual tension during the months leading up to Rachel's canceled ceremony. A few friends even confessed they had noticed how often Olivia spoke about Ethan when Rachel was not present. Rachel listened to these observations with a mixture of frustration and resignation. It is common in situations like this for people to recognize warning signs only after the truth becomes impossible to ignore. At the time, those moments rarely feel important enough to question. Weeks passed, and eventually Rachel learned that Ethan and Olivia had officially moved in together. The wedding invitation Rachel received was not a mistake or an unfinished draft. The ceremony was scheduled to take place in a small venue just outside the city. Rachel wondered how many guests knew the full story behind the relationship and how many had been told a simplified version that made the situation appear less complicated. She decided she did not want to attend or contact them again. Instead, she focused on rebuilding the parts of her life that still belonged to her. But even as Rachel began moving forward, one question continued to follow her thoughts. How long had Olivia been comparing her life to Rachel's without Rachel realizing it? Because when Rachel examined the history of their friendship carefully, she could see that Olivia had always been close enough to observe every detail of Rachel's life. She knew Rachel's dreams, insecurities, habits, and relationships. That level of familiarity creates a unique kind of influence. And sometimes when admiration quietly turns into envy, the boundary between support and competition becomes difficult to recognize. As time passed, Rachel gradually rebuilt her confidence and sense of independence. Yet the experience changed how she understood trust and friendship. She realized that relationships often appear strongest when they are tested by time, but longevity alone does not guarantee honesty. Some friendships remain healthy and supportive for decades, while others slowly transform in ways that are almost impossible to notice until a moment of crisis reveals the truth. Rachel's story became a powerful reminder that betrayal rarely arrives without warning. Often the signs exist quietly in the background, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see them. And as you reflect on Rachel Parker's story, one question still lingers. If you had been in her position, would you have noticed the subtle changes in Olivia and Ethan's behavior sooner? Or would you have trusted the people closest to you the same way Rachel did? One of believing that years of friendship and love made betrayal impossible? Rachel believed that once the truth had surfaced, the worst part of the story was behind her. But what she did not expect was how long the emotional aftermath would linger. Betrayal has a strange way of replaying itself in a person's mind long after the events are over. Rachel would find herself remembering ordinary moments from the past and wondering whether they meant something different than she once believed. A dinner conversation, a group vacation, even simple text messages now carried a new weight when viewed through the reality she had discovered. It was as if the history of her friendship with Olivia had quietly shifted shape, forcing Rachel to reconsider memories she once cherished. About a month after everything came to light, Rachel received a phone call from an acquaintance who worked in the same event planning industry as Olivia. And the woman hesitated at first before explaining why she had decided to call. She said that several months earlier, Olivia had mentioned becoming very close to someone Rachel was dating. At the time, the comment sounded casual, almost like harmless gossip between colleagues. But when news about the wedding began circulating, the woman suddenly realized that Olivia's comment might have referred to Ethan. Rachel listened quietly as the woman described the conversation. According to her memory, Olivia had spoken about Ethan in a way that suggested their connection had started well before Rachel suspected anything was wrong. Hearing that detail stirred a new wave of reflection for Rachel. If Olivia had already been discussing Ethan with others months earlier, it meant the relationship between them had likely grown stronger, while Rachel was still trusting both of them completely. Rachel realized that betrayal often unfolds gradually, walked through small decisions that accumulate over time rather than one dramatic turning point. Olivia and Ethan had not simply crossed a line once. They had crossed it repeatedly, each time choosing silence instead of honesty. And the longer that silence continued, the more difficult it became for either of them to admit what was happening. Rachel also began noticing something else about the people around her. If friends and co-workers were far more open about their opinions of Olivia now that the truth had surfaced. Some admitted they had always sensed a competitive streak in Olivia's personality. Others recalled moments when Olivia seemed unusually interested in Rachel's relationships or personal milestones. One friend mentioned that Olivia often asked detailed questions about Ethan during group gatherings, sometimes even when Rachel was not part of the conversation. None of those observations seemed alarming at the time, but together they painted a picture that Rachel had never fully seen before. As the weeks passed, the date of Ethan and Olivia's wedding quietly arrived. Rachel did not attend, and she chose not to follow the event online or ask mutual friends for updates. Instead, she spent that day visiting her parents, who had offered constant support since everything happened. Sitting on the porch of the home where she grew up, Rachel reflected on how quickly life can change in ways no one anticipates. Just a few months earlier, she had imagined herself preparing for that same kind of wedding celebration. Now she was learning how to move forward without the future she once planned. Surprisingly, the distance from the situation gradually brought Rachel a sense of clarity she had not felt in years. Without the constant presence of Olivia's opinions or Ethan's expectations, Rachel began reconnecting with parts of herself that had quietly faded during the relationship. She traveled more frequently, reconnected with old friends from college, and explored hobbies she had once put aside because life felt too busy. What initially felt like the collapse of her plans slowly transformed into something else entirely. It became an opportunity to rebuild her life on terms that belonged only to her. Several months later, Rachel heard through a mutual friend that Ethan and Olivia's marriage was already facing difficulties. The details were vague, but the friend suggested the relationship between them was far more complicated than it appeared during the wedding celebration. Rachel felt no satisfaction in hearing that news, only a quiet sense that some stories eventually reveal their own consequences without anyone needing to intervene. When relationships begin through secrecy and broken trust, surely the foundation often carries those same tensions forward. Rachel's story eventually became something she shared carefully with people who asked about her past. She did not tell it to seek sympathy or to relive painful memories. Instead, she shared it because many people quietly carry similar experiences of betrayal, even if the circumstances look different on the surface. Her story reminded listeners that trust is one of the most powerful forces in any relationship, and to whether it involves friendship, romance, or family. When that trust is broken, the impact reaches far beyond a single moment of disappointment. Years later, Rachel would sometimes think back to the email that appeared in her inbox on that quiet evening. At the time, it felt like the moment everything ended. Yet with distance, she began to see it differently. That message did not only reveal a betrayal, it also revealed the truth about the people she had allowed into the most important parts of her life. And once that truth was visible, Rachel was free to begin a new chapter, built on a deeper understanding of loyalty, honesty, and self-respect. Stories like Rachel Parker's remind us that betrayal rarely appears without warning, even when those warnings are easy to overlook. Friendships that last many years often feel unbreakable, and love can create a sense of certainty that nothing will ever change. But human relationships are complex, shaped by emotions that sometimes remain hidden until circumstances expose them. In Rachel's case, a friendship that began during college eventually transformed into one of the most painful experiences of her life. Yet it also became a turning point that forced her to rediscover her own strength. Rachel's story did not end on the day Ethan and Olivia married. In many ways, that was only the closing chapter of one part of her life and the quiet beginning of another. The months after the wedding were filled with moments that forced Rachel to rediscover who she was without the future she had imagined for so long. At first, the change felt overwhelming. Every routine in her life had once been connected to Ethan in some way. The apartment they had chosen together, the restaurants they visited on weekends, and even the grocery store they preferred were reminders of a life that no longer existed. Yet as time moved forward, those reminders slowly began losing their power. Rachel started creating new routines, new habits, and new spaces that belonged entirely to her. One of the most important shifts happened when Rachel realized she no longer wanted to carry anger toward Olivia or Ethan. For a while, that anger had been the easiest emotion to hold on to because it gave her a sense of control over what had happened. But eventually, Rachel understood that staying angry meant allowing the betrayal to continue shaping her future. Letting go did not mean forgetting the experience or pretending it never happened. It meant accepting that the choices Ethan and Olivia made were reflections of their own character, not a measure of Rachel's worth. That realization brought a kind of peace she had not expected. About a year after the events that changed everything, Rachel attended a small gathering hosted by a coworker. It was a simple evening with a few people sharing dinner and conversation. Nothing like the large social events she once attended while planning her wedding. During that evening, Rachel noticed how relaxed she felt compared to the version of herself from the previous year. The fear of being deceived again had not disappeared entirely, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. She had learned something important through the experience with Olivia and Ethan. Trust is always a choice, and while betrayal can make that choice more difficult, it does not mean a person should stop trusting completely. At that gathering, Rachel also met someone new. His name was Daniel Hayes, a quiet man who worked as an architect and had recently moved to the city. Their conversation started casually, discussing work projects and favorite travel destinations. There was nothing dramatic or immediate about the connection between them. In fact, what Rachel appreciated most about Daniel was how calm and straightforward their interaction felt. There were no grand promises or intense emotions, just two people getting to know each other slowly, without pressure or expectations. For Rachel, that simplicity felt refreshing after everything she had experienced. Over the following months, Rachel and Daniel spent time together exploring the city, visiting art exhibits, and trying new restaurants. Rachel remained cautious about moving too quickly into another serious relationship, but Daniel seemed to understand that naturally. He never pushed for explanations about her past or demanded commitments she was not ready to make. Instead, he allowed their friendship to grow at a pace that felt comfortable for both of them. That patience gradually helped Rachel rebuild a sense of emotional safety she thought she might never experience again. Meanwhile, news about Ethan and Olivia continued to surface occasionally through mutual acquaintances. Their marriage, which had begun under complicated circumstances, appeared to face ongoing tension. Friends who saw them together described frequent disagreements and an atmosphere that felt uneasy. Rachel listened politely whenever someone mentioned those updates, but she rarely asked questions. She had reached a point where the details of Ethan and Olivia's life no longer felt important to her. Their story had already played its role in her own journey. Looking back on the entire experience, Rachel eventually recognized something that surprised her. The betrayal that once felt like the worst moment of her life had also revealed strengths she did not know she possessed. She learned how to rebuild trust carefully, how to rely on herself during difficult periods, and how to recognize the difference between genuine support and subtle competition within friendships. Those lessons shaped the way Rachel approached relationships moving forward, both romantic and platonic. The story of Rachel Parker, Olivia Grant, and Ethan Cole continues to resonate with many people because it reflects a truth about human relationships that often remains unspoken. Trust creates powerful bonds between people, but it also requires vulnerability. When someone chooses to betray that trust, the emotional impact can feel overwhelming. Yet Rachel's journey also shows that betrayal does not have to define the rest of a person's life. With time, reflection, and support, it is possible to rebuild a future that feels even more authentic than the one that was lost. And as you reflect on Rachel's story, it raises a question that many viewers continue discussing long after hearing the details. If someone close to you began crossing boundaries behind your back, would you recognize the warning signs early enough to protect yourself? Or would loyalty and familiarity make those signals easy to overlook until the truth appeared in a moment you never expected? Stories like this remind us that the people closest to us shape our lives in powerful ways, and the choices they make can change our path forever. If you enjoyed hearing this story, kindly drop a comment below sharing your thoughts and also where you are watching from. We would love to see your city in the comment section and understand how far this community reaches. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss any upcoming stories. By subscribing, you become part of a community that values thoughtful storytelling and open conversations about trust, relationships, and the complicated nature of human behavior. And remember to like the video as well, because it helps more people discover stories like Rachel's and join the discussion.